Keeping venomous reptiles is an unforgiving hobby, requiring proper training and lots of experience. One simple mistake can be the difference between life and death. Remember, the most venomous snake in the world is the one that just bit you. There are no venomous snakes with training wheels. Just because you see viperkeeper handle snakes a certain way does not mean you should try it too.
Hello everybody, viperkeeper here. Late last night I returned home from Venom Week. Venom Week is a every other year conference put on by the North American Society of Toxicology, which I'm a member of. I've been attending them since the first one. This is the 8th one, so I've been going there every other year to get the latest on anything and everything venomous. The range of topics runs from venom proteomics to clinical snakebite treatment, to anti-venom development, to drug development, all these things that revolve around the use of venom. It could be venom from snakes, centipedes, stingrays, coelenterates, I mean anything that's venomous. This year it was held in Gainesville, Florida at the university there, which I actually visit quite often in my regular job, so it is not only a large transfer of information over the course of 3 or 4 days, but you also get to visit with investigators, talk to them personally, renew old friendships, make new friendships. For instance, I met Dr. Kate Bush. Cut. This year I had the opportunity to meet 2 people that I had corresponded with, but actually got to visit with them. Dr. Kate Jackson, who is the world authority on snakes of Central Africa, most notably the Congo, or the Democratic Republic of Congo as it's known now. She's spent lots and lots of time there, knows the herpetofauna really well, and Scott Weinstein, who I corresponded with because he's the author of a book called Venomous Bites by Non-Venomous Animals, most in particular colubrids. I got to meet him for the first time, and he comes from a scientific lineage which I am closely associated with. He was a student of Sherman Minton, whom is Dan Kyler, my personal venom doc, is also a student of Sherman Minton, and my good friend Jim Harrison learned and was mentored by Dr. Minton. So Scott is a physician in Adelaide, Australia, but he hails from Long Island, New York. So he's over treating some very serious snake bites in Australia, but he has this immense knowledge of snakes in general. He's a herpetologist. He started off like many of us, just the love of snakes and stuff. So I got to meet him, and he he put on an awesome presentation about just scratching the surface about colubrids, which we consider fairly harmless, but actually can cause some serious envenomation sequelae. And Kate Jackson was good to touch base with her because since she's the expert and wrote a book, and I'll show you the book that she wrote with Jean-Philippe Chapeau, who's another amazing snakebite doctor and herpetologist, spent most of his life in Africa treating snakebite. Those two authored the book. I very much look forward to getting that. But I showed her pictures of my water cobras from the Congo, and she's never seen those, and she's only seen annulata, and she said to me that these don't look like annulata. So I'm going to get some sheddings to her, and she has a genetic database, and she's going to take a look at the DNA and see, you know, how closely or who these things are really sort of related to. And then after that, we may have a look at their venom composition to see how it is in common or differs with the other water cobras in the area. So, and as a side benefit, you know, I keep a vast collection of animals here, and sometimes, despite my best effort, animals that come in from a shipment have issues, parasitism, or poor care by the exporters, as well as, you know, just natural sort of die-off here at the lair. Some of those animals have been going to a paleoherpetologist that I used to work with, Dennis Parmalee. He's down in Georgia, but he's retired now. And if you look back through the video catalog, there's a video that I went to his lab. He's a paleoherpetologist, so he takes the bones of present-day venomous snakes and compares it to those bones to the fossil evidence he finds at various dig sites. At any rate, he's retired, and I have no place or no investigator to send these deceased animals to, but Dr. Jackson it would be very happy to receive these for her teaching collection at the university. So I'm very happy that, you know, these animals will go and sort of donate their bodies to science to teach the next generation of herpetologists. So there were two people of note that I was very happy to run into. Let's talk briefly about the conference itself. You know, I can't talk too much about some of the information presented because it's ongoing research and it's unpublished. And I don't want, you know, competing labs to scoop up some information. And as I said, some of these are just preliminary findings, but they're very interesting and very important findings that were presented. So of course, you know, there's a bunch of corporate sponsors that sponsor the proceedings. So let me talk about a few of these interesting talks that I think that would be very interesting to everybody. Dr. Charles Sani and of, I believe, University of Oklahoma did this really nice study using size exclusion chromatography. I know, big words on you know, this is very heavy in genetics and biochemistry and you know, even though I've done lots of biochemistry and these sort of things, some of this is just over even my level of understanding, but these people put it together in a way that it's understandable, the data is presented. Well, he's using this technique to gauge the cross-reactivity of venoms and antivenoms. Very interesting study. It's ongoing work. It may have some clinical implications and certainly implications in producing antivenom in the future. Another talk about snake venom, cysteine-rich secretory proteins. They give all these chemicals and proteins and enzymes and peptides, abbreviations, thankfully. These are called SV crisps. And what mechanisms they and actions in blood and lymph endothelial cells. You know, if you remember from a lot of, copperhead bites, you get some serious swelling. Well, this damages the lymph system and can cause a permanent lymphedema. So that's what his talk was all about. And there was another talk by Roberto Ponce Lopez about Crotalus cymus and how to generate antibodies in, against these venom proteins. Variations. One thing that is very clear, not every antivenom will neutralize all the components of the venom that it's raised against. And this this talk about Crotalus basiliscus, Miss Green downstairs. There's another antivenom company in Mexico, Biramex, talking about variations in neutralization by that antivenom against Crotalus basiliscus. Perhaps one of the most amazing talks, and he had videos to go with it, was Dr. Matt Lewin, and he's talking about this investigational drug that's FDA approved, but for different reasons. It's called varisplatid. Okay, he just calls it the drug because he can't pronounce it either. However, it's a phospholipase 2 inhibitor, and he showed some videos of some veterinary tests that he and some veterinary colleagues did using some serious neuro and myotoxic venoms from the Mojave rattlesnake and the Papuan taipan. They gave these pigs lethal doses of both these venoms, not at the same time, in separate studies, and the pigs went down. They had serious neurotoxicity, and they injected a bolus of this compound, and in a very short amount of time these pigs were back up on their feet. Some of them were eating. This is a very exciting development that is working its way through the system, because this can be used in the field. It is also available perhaps as a nasal spray or perhaps even an oral tablet. But this is a potentially game-changing drug for serious elapid envenomation around the world. This was an amazing talk. If you could only see the videos that everybody saw, your jaw would be on the floor, and how effective this drug was. long ways off. I mean, a lot of these things may never make it to market, but these are areas that are being investigated. You know, basic science builds future science that makes our lives better. So always remember that. Push your local congressmen and senators to fund basic science. Then we had a whole bunch of veterinary talks, some very good, you know, some serious, you know, talk about coral snake envenomation in cats in Florida, eastern coral snakes. The bottom line is, if your cat is bitten by a coral snake in Florida, anti-venom is expensive. However, keeping your cat on a ventilator for a week or 10 is far more expensive. So the rule of thumb is, don't balk at the cost of the anti-venom, even though it's quite expensive, because if you keep your cat on a ventilator for a week, it'll be several $1,000s instead of $1,000 or $2,000. That's just, I mean, it's much more complex than that, but well, we won't go any further than that. Snake bite in you know, in companion animals is serious. We treat that on the National Snakebite Support page. We have veterinary care there, as well as experts for human. Another lady I met who's a veterinarian, she was talking about exposure of dogs, and basically supporting dogs and keeping them alive after the stupid dogs ate pufferfish on the beach and stuff. Pufferfish, as you know, contains toxin, fugu. You know, they specially prepare this food in Japan. But she had a very nice talk about that, and then, you know, I had lots of personal conversations with her. I sat next to her in a number of the talks, and you know, she of course treats lots of venomous snake bites in companion animals, and she's told me that they've brought in essentially clinically dead dogs who've tangled with western brown snakes, and they are quite successful at resuscitating these essentially clinically dead animals with by copious use of antivenin and other resuscitative techniques. And she says, the dogs go home the next day, which is really good, because no one wants to see their pet die at all. And you know, she's very successful, and she sort of has some disagreement with colleagues because of a paper that was produced that you only need 1 vial of antivenin to treat snakebite in Australia, and Scott Weinstein for one, and many others say that's complete bunk. You treat the symptoms, you treat with antivenin until the symptoms go away. This 1 vial theory is a bunch of bull, and you know, she has some disagreements with her colleagues because she gives more than 1 antivenin. However, her success rate of resuscitating these animals and sending them home the next day is quite high. So hats off to her. I'm just sort of cherry picking here to try to keep this somewhat short. Kate Jackson did this really nice talk about the snakes of the Congo and such. And then there's a lot of interesting peptides and actual components of venom they were talking about. There's actually some talks about some wandering spider toxins that seem to have some promise for glaucoma treatment. Go figure. You never know. You never underestimate the power of venom and what it can do. There's a number of things going on with crotamine and some drugs in the people in Brazil for treatments for MS to reduce the effects of multiple sclerosis, Lou Gehrig's disease, those sort of things, but also using it as an analgesia because it's a very potent, long-lasting, non-addictive, non-tolerance building analgesic. And they're working with the biomaterials people and incorporating them in these little silica beads, so it's sort of a time-to-release sort of drug. Again, something for the future, but you know, it requires basic science and investigation before it can move forward to drug development and clinical trials. Yeah, now Scott Weinstein's talk, bites from non-front fang snakes, medical significance, troublesome terminology, and taxing taxonomy. Very good talk by Scott. The consensus is we don't necessarily will call them rear fangs anymore. We will call them non-front fangs. I will have to learn to change my terminology. Snake envenomation outcomes vary widely. You know, that was a title of another talk. Let's see here. There was a comparison between Fab antivenoms and Fab 2 antivenoms in New Mexico, treating with, this was a comparison treating with Antivip versus Crofab. Very interesting study. We need both of those antivenoms in our life. There will be some, of course, some additional trials and stuff with Antivip because that is new on the market, just became on the market here in the U.S. in October of 2018, so there's a lot of work to be done on that. Dr. Bill Hayes, who I've known for a long time, his lab does amazing science on a shoestring budget. Again, talk to your representatives, get people to fund basic science. Was talking about venom shifts in southwestern rattlesnakes depending on diet. And this is why antivenoms are very tricky to create, because the venom composition you're using to create the antivenom may be from one population of snakes but not another that are feeding on something else. Therefore, you don't get good cross-reactivity. There's a lot of evolutionary talks. This was a very good one. This was from a young lady from Mexico, but also worked with Dr. Boyer in Tucson. Venom absorption after snake bite. Very interesting talk centering around the eastern coral snake. It seems eastern coral snake bites, sometimes you don't necessarily see an effect for 12 to 18 hours after the bite. Sometimes it's sooner, but this was helping to absorb, to explain why that happens. There seems to be a little pocket of venom that's injected, and it just sort of sits there and eventually makes its way out. But another interesting tidbit from her talk was that there is a tiny fraction of in the venom. It's not okay. If you, maybe I can show you what an HPLC graph looks like, looking at all the different molecular weight fractions in the venom. But you know, the three-finger toxins and your majority of your phospholipase 2, which are your neurotoxins, those peaks are quite high. Well, there's this little tiny bump, a very small amount of this very potent neurotoxin, and the thing that they discovered is that the antivenom doesn't neutralize this particular toxin. So this is ongoing work, very interesting stuff. Then there was a whole bunch of talks about really sort of, should we modify how we administer Crofab? Should we give a large bolus of antivenom immediately, which everybody agrees is the right way to do it, but then rather than switch to doses down the road if you have a recurrent coagulopathy, or maybe we should infuse it over a longer period of time and stuff. So there were some interesting talks. And then my friend Nick Brandyhoff, who's on the National Snakebite Support Team, and he goes to West Africa and treats snake bites. They use ketamine rather than opiates over there for pain control in patients, and you know, opiates are, you know, really sort of habit forming, and if you're bitten by an elapid, you certainly don't want to add something which causes respiratory depression. So he had a very nice talk about case studies on how they use ketamine and the dosages and stuff over there. Hats off to those guys who go over in very austere conditions, treat envenomations in people who there's barely a clinic there to work in, and they lose power quite often and have to work by flashlight. Then there was a suspected eastern diamondback envenomation where they actually did a fasciotomy, and doing fasciotomies for snake bites is always controversial. It almost always shouldn't be done, and but they did measure some very high compartment pressures and did find some necrotic muscle. So there was a lot of discussion on that, and you know, I think there was one surgeon in the room, and everybody sort of ganged up on him. For the most part, you want to keep surgeons out of your room if you're ever snake bitten, because snake bite is a medical emergency, not a surgical emergency, and that's absolutely a fact. By elevating the limb, I mean not by elevating, I mean really elevating the limb that's bitten, whether it be your leg or foot, and giving adequate amounts of antivenom as quickly as possible. This is the key to reduce the swelling, hence you never develop any even something close to compartment pressure. This particular patient, there was almost no elevation in the leg, and my friend Captain Jeff Fobb from Venom 1, he even questioned, and I agree with him, that it may not have even been an eastern diamondback bite, because the presentation wasn't necessarily what you would expect from an eastern diamondback bite. He thinks it may have been a cottonmouth, and the reason why the victim said it was a rattlesnake is that he heard rattling. Well, Echistrodon are famous, as well as Bothrobs, for rattling their tail in the substrate when they're pissed off. You know, and the patient didn't really have a coagulopathy, but had lots of amounts of swelling, and so in this case I sort of concur with Jeff that it may not have been an eastern diamondback. They may have had the wrong wrong perpetrator. Let's see here. So there was a bunch of other invertebrate sort of talks on spider venoms and vinegaroon exposures. Yeah, I mean, there was a whole bunch of those. There was a very interesting talk of the family that the brown recluse spider's in, the Sicarias. Greta Binford did a very nice talk. You know, and the Sicaria, you know, are found everywhere, but I'm sure lots of people have seen the video of this one little sand spider, you know, nestling down in the sand and using its front legs to cover its head with sand. They're so adorable, but they have a very bad bite. So that was a really good talk that I liked a lot. Dr. Ben Abo did a really good talk about capnography, which is measuring the CO2 that you exhale in an intubated patient, and how important that is to measure if you're treating a snake bite, because it can give you a hint on what's coming down the road as far as a respiratory crash faster and more accurately than you can by just having a little pulse oximeter on your finger. So, you know, Ben is a super guy. He's like a MacGyver of field medicine. You know, he treats patients in very bad places, like, you know, underneath overturned vehicles that they haven't been able to extract the victim. He's under there treating them, intubating them, getting IV lines in them, getting them stabled until the fire department can extract them. A real super hero in my estimation. You know, I think that well, pretty much covers it. This has gone on far longer than I really wanted it to. However, you know, 3.5 days of talks sort of leaves your brain numb by the end of the week, and for every question scientifically these people answered in their studies, they created like 10 or 15 new questions to be investigated. Very worthwhile if you're, you know, serious snake person, especially if you have an interest in toxins like I've had since I was a teenager. So, you know, this was my fun week of the year that I took on vacation and sort of decompressed from my normally stressful activities and my normal job and stuff. However, it left me with a 1 day short. It's Sunday of animal husbandry, so the big guys are going to be pissed at me because they're not going to get fed. I'm going to care for the babies and other snakes that really sort of need to be cared for, and I don't want, you know, they're growing. I really want them to get food. I don't know if you guys can see it, but she's really interested in getting something to eat, and she's been off feed for quite some time. I don't know what's going on, but now she looks very hungry. She's eaten sort of sporadically, so I will definitely feed her. That's an indication that she's interested in something to eat. So I'll close by saying this. Snake venom, anti-venom treatment of snake bite is far more complicated than most people believe, and I think, you know, even the scientists realize that this is far more complex and difficult nut to crack. Finally the World Health Organization declared this a neglected disease. We're starting to see some funding go into these areas, which is long overdue. We can mitigate both mortality and morbidity, which is the loss of function. In some of these developing countries, if you survive the snake bite and you lose part of your foot, or you can't work in the field, or your hand, your family suffers, and these people live on like $500 a year, and this is devastating. And I will put up a link and the logo of the snakebite group that I work with, which goes to Western Africa and is planning to go work with Kate Jackson in the Congo to develop effective snakebite clinics there. They see 5 to 10 snake bites a day. Please contribute to this nonprofit so they can continue their work helping people that unfortunately have bad encounters with snakes. Thanks very much.